games from the Tata Steel Masters that's going on. And the first game that we're going to see is between the tournament leader Gugesh and Hari Krishna. Hari Krishna was the tournament leader before this seventh round, and in seventh round, Gugesh played a good game and caught up with the leaders. So right now, Gugesh, Abdusatrov, and Pragnananda are all tied for first. So let's get started. Gugesh was white. He starts with e4. Hari Krishna was Gugesh's second in the last month's World Championship. So they play the same opening that happened in the World Championship a lot with Ding Liren. E4, E6, the French, D4, D5, and Gugesh chooses the advanced variation, E5. C5 was played by Hari Krishna. After C5, C3, knight C6. So in the French, basically black puts pressure on the D4 pawn. So knight C6, knight F3, bishop D7, bishop E2, and knight to E7. The knight is heading to the F5 square to put more pressure on the D4 pawn. So knight E7, castles by Gugesh, and Hari Krishna chooses to take. Takes, takes, and knight to F5. Pressure on the D4 point. Two pieces attacking. There are already two defenders. So Gugesh just develops this knight to C3. And here Hari Krishna has choices queen B6. There is knight A4, and the queen won't be able to stay long over there. So after knight C3, Hari Krishna goes A6, so that the queen can come and go to A7. So kind of threatening queen to B6. King H1 was played by Gugesh. Kind of a surprise. King to H1. Now you might think, what happens if queen B6? Basically he's preparing G4, so that when the knight takes this bishop E3, pinning the knight. And if the bishop comes out, there's knight A4, queen and bishop fork. So he plays king H1, preparing to push G4. After rook C8, what does Gugesh do next? First he plays rook to B1, queen to B6, and now the moment has come. Do we go for G4? He does. G4, again knight takes pawn would be a blunder, because those are in the chat, could you tell me why is this move a blunder? There are three attackers, two defenders. So why can't Hari Krishna take on D4, the D4 pawn? Let's see if there's any answers. Not yet. Anybody? No? So hi to those who are in the chat. The problem with knight takes pawn is bishop E3, and if bishop C5, knight A4. You lose a piece. So which means you can't take the pawn for free. So the knight jumps back to E7. Now bishop E3. The B2 pawn is already defended by the rook. Okay. The board is mirrored. Is that an issue with everybody? 1 second. I'm not sure why is the board mirrored actually. It wasn't an issue before. Let me just check in the settings. If anybody knows how to fix it, do let me know. I don't see it in the settings. In camera, I can do that, but in YouTube Live, it directly takes it from the camera. So I'm not sure how to unmirror it actually. Okay. I'll definitely fix it before the next live. I'll see what I can do. So for now, let's continue. In case you have a suggestion or if you have an idea how to change it, please let me know. Okay. So after we were on G4, knight E7 and bishop B3. And here Hari Krishna goes for H5, the most active move, challenging the kingside space of Gugesh. After H5, G5 by Gugesh, and knight comes back to F5. Now there's already a bishop defending it, so there's no threat. So after knight to F5, G6, Gugesh's G pawn is going up the board. Like the H pawn of Alpha 0, now the G pawn has gone up the board, and Hari Krishna reacts by playing F6, leaving that strong pawn on G6 for Gugesh. E into f6, g into f6, and bishop to d3. So position looks comfortable for white. White has got all the active pieces. He's got the file for the rook when he wants to. So position looks comfortable for white. So after rook to after rook to g1, sorry, not rook g1, bishop d3, the knight went to e7 to defend f5, and now rook to g1, kind of keeping pawn g7 in the air, and the bishop becomes active, rook becomes active. So after rook bishop to g7, which stops the pawn from going anywhere, now comes knight to a4. So the interesting moment of the game is about to happen. Knight to a4, attacking the queen. The queen goes to d6 and b4, gaining space on the queen side as well. b6 by Gugesh, knight c5 was in the air, so b6 by Harikrishna, so knight c5 is stopped with that move. And now b5 by Gugesh takes, bishop into b5, bishop into b5, rook into b5, knight into e3, and pawn into e3. Lot of exchanges. At the end of all this, basically, there is a target on d6 that Gugesh can attack forever. So this is always there, and this is hanging right now. And if you defend it, it's too passive. Rook c6 is also there, but white can put more pressure. So how will Hare Krishna fight back? How can he get his own advantage going? Let's see. After here he plays rook c6, defending the pawn for now. Queen comes to b3, more pressure, and now you can't defend unless you go knight here, but then there will be again rook to b1. So he goes. Can you find out how to fight back with black without going too passive? How can white fight back in this position? We were at rook c6, queen b3, and here what to do? Hare Krishna just castles, allowing knight into b6, but now Hare Krishna gets his play with bishop to h6. Bishop h6, keeping an eye on the e3 pawn, and knight f5 is coming. So that's his compensation. He gets knight f5 coming in. So after bishop h6, the knight goes back because he can go to c5. Rook c5 can be played by Gugesh. So after knight to a4, knight f5. How will Gugesh react? The e3 pawn is attacked. You can play rook e1 if you want to, but then you are leaving the open file, king g7, and the pawn is hanging. So how can Gugesh react to this? He plays rook c5, takes, and this was the critical moment of the game. Here Hare Krishna played knight into e3, which turns out to be a blunder. This is what gave Gugesh the win. Can you find out what move Gugesh can play here? In this position, after this knight takes pawn, which makes the material equal, Hare Krishna's move, this move was a blunder because Gugesh can play something here. So try to find out the move for white in this position, guys. What can white do here? So today there's less people in the YouTube live. Can I know who is already watching? Hi, whoever you are. So right now we are at move number 29, where the move knight into e3 was played. What move can white play here is the question. What can Gugesh do in this position? There is a very active move that Gugesh can play here. The move is queen to b7 with the threat of queen to h7 checkmate, which forces black to go back with the bishop. There's no rook f7, pawn is there. So instead of, yeah, well done, Amber. Hi, Amber. So instead of knight into e3, if bishop into e3 was played, this was still okay. Because now after queen b7, can you find out what black can play? Those who are in the chat, what move is available for Hari Krishna if this position had happened? If queen b7 with the threat, same threat happens, what can black do now which was not available earlier? This position is equal because black can play. What can black do here? Queen to e7, shooing away the white queen because the knight is still protecting it. But in the variation we saw when this happened, because the knight had taken on e3, after queen b7 there is no queen e7. King e7, you mean queen e7, right, Subin? Yeah, queen e7 basically. Oh, you meant knight e7. For knight, when you write the moves, it has to be capital N. Like when you play in tournament, when you write your moves, for knight it's capital N, e7, not k. K is for king. Anyway, so now bishop g7 is forced. Bishop g7 was played after queen b7, and now rook e1, forcing the knight back. Knight goes to f5, and here comes knight into e6. So Gukesh has now won a pawn. Black got back one pawn, but now e6 is attacked. E6 is gone, and g7 is hanging, kind of hanging. Knight's defending it, but there is pressure on g7. So knight is position is now very good for Gukesh. Rook to b8, attacking the queen. Queen f7 check, king h8. And now how will you continue, guys? What's the next step? Whenever you're attacking, right, the first step is usually activating the pieces, and then before the attack actually happens, you might want to remove the best defender of your opponent. So here the best defender is the bishop. If knight is there, it was okay. We can go around it. But the bishop is covering all the important squares. So Gukesh chops off the bishop. Knight takes, opens up the rook as well. The next move is obvious. We have to play. Even someone who just started playing chess would play this. You got to bring your rook e7, rook to e7. There is no need to be afraid of the check because the king can go up and the king can hide here. Which means, hello, hi Dr. Guitar EV. So there's a threat of mate. If the rook goes away, the mate is kind of unstoppable. So which means the rook has no need to defend here. The rook goes in. Black has only one way to defend. What is that move, guys? The rook has to go. Rook to g8, defending. So he forced Hari Krishna's pieces to be so passive. Now comes the next step. How are you going to win this? You got an extra pawn, that's the a pawn. Your knight can jump in, but the king is feeling a little alone. So it's not easy to convert this. So let's see how Gukesh did this. After rook g8, he goes rook d7, attacking the queen. Queen goes to b6. The pawn is hanging. He picks up the pawn. Now he is up by 2 pawns. Rook takes pawn. But now queen b1. The king is alone there. So king goes to g2. Are we going to see a king walk? f5. Kind of getting some pieces to like trap the king. f5. Rook to c5. Getting ready to push and defending the a2 pawn. But now after f5, knight g5 is also possible. Another option for Gukesh. So after rook c5, queen b2 check. King f1. Queen a1 check. King f2. Queen b2. So how do you hide? Where do you hide with your king? Because if the check stops, then you can go knight g5. So here, queen b2 check, the king goes to h3. Now h4 check. Do you take it? It's risky to take it. Queen f2 check and the king will not have queen. Wait, which move are you talking about? Queen g7, rook g7, and then what? You need the rook will go back. No? So that sacrifice is yet to happen. It's not yet possible. It's there, but not yet. So h4, king f4. The king is walking up, like in the Nigel Short game. Queen b8 check. Where do you move the king? Of course, okay, he plays rook e5 first. Because queen d8 was there if king went here. So rook e5, queen d6. The checks are over. The checks are over. And now king g5. Unbelievable move. He's basically attacking the h4 pawn. And he's preparing king h6, knight g5. Total control. So you won't see this a lot in chess games. A king stepping up the board by itself and helping the attack. Black rook is stuck because anytime this rook can come back. And once king h6 happens, the knight is pinned always, and the rook is stuck, which means white rook will have full play. So after king h6, knight g5, ideas of rook e8 will also be there. Knight is pinned, and if rook takes, then queen takes g7. So yeah, so here after king to g5, queen b8 was played, and here Gukesh did not go with king h6, he came back to f4, and here queen d6. So basically they repeated once, and now weirdly enough Hari Krishna resigned in this position after repeating one time. Probably he would have calculated after king g5 king h6 is possible. Like again, if he repeats, if he goes king g5 this, he would have understood that the position is hopeless, and king h6 would be just a killer, because now knight g5 comes, and after that there's no check also for Hari Krishna. So this was the most important game of the tournament, because with this win, Gugesh overtook Hari Krishna, who was the leader, and now is tied with Pragnananda and Nodirbek. So 3 leaders after round 7. I believe there are total 13 rounds in the tournament. So now we are going to see a game between Fabiano Caruana and Fedosiv. A big upset that happened in the tournament. Caruana is not having a great tournament. Carlsen is not playing. And this game was a long game, but it's for those who love end games, this is a very good lesson. So let's go to the second game that we're going to analyze today. Let me set the position. So hi to everyone who has joined. I know it's been a while since our last live, so good to see you all back. All right. So this is Caruana versus Fedosiv. Caruana was, I believe, black here. Let me see. So Caruana was black, Fedosiv was white, and d4 was played by Fedosiv. d4, d5, c4. The Queen's Gambit. The most popular options: decline or play the slab. So Caruana goes for the decline. Now knight f3, knight f6. So we'll go quickly through the opening, because it was a quiet game until the end game. So knight to c3, bishop b4, bishop to g5, pinning each other's knights. h6 takes. So if you go back, there is g5, and you've got to deal with all complications. So takes, queen a4 check, knight c6, and e3. Castles, bishop to e2, takes on c4, and castles. Again, a quiet position out of the opening. Queen to e7, keeping an eye on the bishop. Queen e7, bishop into c4, and knight to a5. So that's why he played queen e7 to free up his knight. So after knight a5, the bishop goes back to d3, keeping it on a good diagonal. Bishop into c3, pawn into c3, and b6, preparing to put the bishop on the long diagonal. Okay, so here, queen to b4, asking for an exchange of queens. Queen d6. Caruana says, if you want to exchange, you exchange and make my pawn structure better by getting one more pawn to the center. So Fedosiv says, no thanks. He plays rook d1, bishop to b7. So here you can feel that black is taking slight control of the position. He's got a good diagonal for the bishop. So kind of position that you expect the high rated player, the world number 3 I believe, Caruana, to win. So he goes bishop e7, rook c1, rook c8, rook a c8, queen takes, pawn takes, and knight to d2, preparing to expand in the center or with c4. Knight to d2, rook c7. So both sides are preparing to, black is preparing to double and put more pressure on the pawn, and Fedosiev reacts with rook c2. Rook f c8, rook c1. And now king f8. So we are in an endgame. There is a target on this pawn, and that's why it feels like black has got some advantage in the position. Pawn f3, king e7 by Caruana, e4 and g5. King f2 and Caruana plays e5, kind of locking down the pawn structure in the center. So after e5, knight to f1 was played by Fedosiev. Takes and takes. Caruana has the option to exchange of all the rooks. So he goes for rook into c2, rook takes, and bishop takes. So having the center would not matter that much if there are only minor pieces, right? So that is why Caruana went for this. Now we have a minor piece endgame where white has the center, black has slightly more active king, and black has a weak pawn on d6. So here after this he plays bishop to c8, that's Caruana, and bishop to d3, slowly improving the position, knight c6, king e3, a6, and knight comes back to d2, heading to the square on c4, b5 stopping knight c4, and knight b3, d5 challenging the pawn center, knight to c5 and king to d6. So far it's all equal. They are just waiting around, moving the pieces around. Bishop to c2, knight e5. Wait, one second. Knight c5, king d6, bishop to c2. Oh, knight e5. So basically it's not a piece blunder. If white takes here, the king will take here. So is taking good? No, he goes bishop to b3, attacking the pawn. Knight to c4 check. Now taking here is definitely bad. Okay. Taking here is definitely bad because you're giving a passed pawn for the opponent. So bishop to b3, knight c4 check, king to d3, knight to b6, kind of defending the pawn on d5, king c3. On a good day, the king could jump here and put pressure on the corner pawns. So we were at knight b6, king c3, a5, stopping king b4, a3 and f6. Position is still kind of locked. It's not clear where you can create play from. After f6, bishop came to a2, king c6. This is almost 40th move, so they are like making some waiting moves. So now g3, and this is where things happen. Here comes the most important moment of this game. After bishop to h3, move number 39, knight b3 was played, knight a4 check, king c2, and here Caruana has to decide, do I go for more? He has got a position where a draw is easy. You can play moves like g4 or pawn takes and then g4. Directly g4, because if takes then bishop takes and then takes king takes, it's going to be equal. So that is one option. But here he has another option which seems very tempting. I would like to ask you guys, would you go for bishop g2? Putting pressure on the diagonal, on the pawns. What is your opinion about bishop g2 for black? Let's see if any of you can decide what to do here for black, for Caruana. Okay, Subin says yes. Let's go bishop g2. Looks like a very active move. Yeah, Dr. Guitarivi also says bishop g2. So it's a very natural thing to do. Like you would want to put pressure on the diagonal, good diagonal for the bishop. Caruana goes for it after a long thing. But that was the reason why he lost the game. Bishop g2 was a blunder. Why? Why is bishop g2 a mistake? Because the pawn is hanging. And if you take, again, the bishop will be active and king will be active. Okay. Okay. Those who've seen the games, good if you're following the games. Those who haven't seen the games, can you find out what happens now? What can white do in this position? After bishop g2, what is it that white has got in this position? There is a very nice move that gives white a good advantage. And Fedosiv played it. Fedosiv played e5. Let me see where we are. This was move number 41. So the point of e5 is after takes, the e pawn is too strong. And combined with the knight and this bishop and pressure on d5, the king is not able to handle the pawn that is running down the board. So here after takes, b4 was played by Caruana. Knight d4 check. The knight jumps in, king goes to c5, and now next move, can you find out what to play for white? What is the most natural thing for white to do? The knight's hanging, but of course you can see what is possible. What idea is possible here for white? You can play e6. The only piece stopping that can stop the pawn is the king. The bishop has to control this square to stop it, which it will be hard. You can come like this, but right now no. So e6, and king cannot take the knight. The king has to step back. So after e6, king went to d6, takes, and now comes a stunning move. A brilliant move by Fedosiv. Can you find out the next move that white can play here? You've got the advantage. Material is equal, but you have the passed pawn, but only if you find the next move, the position makes sense. The advantage will be yours only if you find the next move. Alright, Amber has seen it. Bishop into d5, winning one more pawn. Not just winning the pawn, now bishop is also active and knight's active, knight f5 is coming. And the pawn is going up. So bishop into d5 was played. Caruana is under pressure. He plays bishop to f1. Bishop back to b3, attacking the knight. Knight went to c5, knight f5. The pawn is getting to e7. King came to e5, e7. Now there's only one way to stop the pawn, which is with the bishop. Right? He first plays bishop to d3 check. The king goes to d2, and now bishop to b5. How do we win this, guys? This is kind of a situation which you can get in a lot of your games. You've got a pawn about to promote. The bishop is stopping it. The knight is kind of there to help. Is knight g7 enough? Would that be good enough to win this? Let's see. What do you guys think? After bishop b5, what move is best for white? Knight g7 makes sense, right? Because the king can't come back. You'll win a piece. But first, he plays bishop c4 as Fedosiv. Just poking the opponent. The bishop cannot take. Bishop goes to a4. And now knight g7. Winning a piece. g4. Caruana has to go for desperate attempts here. f4 check. King d4. A fake attack on the king. So king to d4. And now bishop to f7. He wants to promote and take back with the bishop. He doesn't want the knight to stay inactive there. So after bishop to f7, knight e4 check, and the bishop was hanging. The king was about to take the bishop. So knight e4 check, king e1, knight c3. This pawn is also passed. Don't forget that, guys. This is also a passed pawn now. You've got a pawn to promote. You will win a piece, but then you'll have to handle this pawn. And king is too passive, far away. So how do you deal with it? So after king to e1, sorry, knight e4 check happened. 1 second. We were on king d4, bishop, sorry. There was bishop f7, knight e4 check, king e1 and king c3. King c3. And now promotes. The bishop took it, knight took it, and now b3. This is the hard part for a lot of players. Like you've got a winning position, you've got an extra piece, but now opponent gets counterplay. So in our chess, in our journey, you will get to a moment, a path where you will be able to get winning positions, but then when opponent gets counterplay, we get lost in the way. So this is one such example. How do you deal with this? What is our solution to this pawn being passed? How are we going to win this? So if you have any suggestions, please send it in the chat. What can white do here? The pawn has just played to b3. What to do? The winning move for white, the best option that white can do here is just bishop takes b3, and that's what Fedosiev does. Give up the bishop, exchange, simplify the position, and after king takes, bishop into b3, king takes, we have a knight endgame where you have a pass pawn, and that is a winning advantage for white. So here Caruana resigned and Fedosiev won because the king is going to become active along the way and the pawn is going to run. So this was an important game for the tournament. The world top player Caruana lost to Fedosiev. So now we are going to see a game between the two youngsters, Pragnananda and Arjun. Arjun was having a bad tournament. He lost a lot of games, a lot of rating in the first few rounds. And this game with Pragnananda was important. So let's see what happened when Pragnananda, who was white, faced Arjun, who was black. So let me set the position. So by the way, those who are there in the live, this is my first live after getting monetized. So super chats are active. So if you feel like the channel is helping you, please do super chat. It will be helpful for me, motivating for me to do more lives. So this tournament is like a redemption tournament for Pragnananda, who has been doing well and is now leading the tournament. He couldn't do well so much in the last few months, but this is a good event for him. And if he can win it along with Gugesh or do well, it will be great to have top players of India at the top level. So which opening do you think Pragnananda will play against Arjun? Arjun is known for like different weird openings that are not sound but puts opponent under pressure. What do you think Pragnananda will do? Stable opening, sound opening, right? He goes for d4. No bevelings, no e4, just d4. Knight to f6, c4, e6, so it's heading to a queen's gambit decline like in the last game. Knight f3 and d5, so it's a queen's gambit decline. g3, Catalan setup that Pragnananda chooses, takes, and bishop g2. So he's not trying to get back the pawn. The pawn is just a weakness. You can pick it up with queen a4, queen c4, or knight d2 anytime. So bishop to g2 and c5. Arjun instantly attacks the sender with c5. Castles by Prag, knight c6 by Arjun. Takes, we go to an endgame, queen into d1, rook into d1, bishop into c5. The pawn is still not picked up. Pragnananda is yet to pick up this pawn. So what does he do after bishop to c5? He goes knight d2. Now a very cute moment here. The pawn is going to be picked up. If you play b5, there's a4. So it won't be easy to hold that. So how do you give back the pawn? Just let Pragnananda take it? Or do you give it to him in a way that benefits you? Give it to him in a way that benefits you, because now the white pawn is weak, isolated. Pawn structure is slightly damaged. So takes, castles, knight to e1, opening up the bishop, bishop to d7, rook to b1, and knight to a5, defending the pawn. Now knight b3 takes, takes, and bishop to c6, defending the pawn again. Another exchange, takes, takes. So a lot of exchanges. We've got a endgame where there are just 4 pieces. So takes, takes, knight to d3, bishop goes back to e7, bishop e3, white's pieces slowly coming back, rook c8, bishop c5, another exchange incoming. So bishop c5, the king comes to f8, rook to a1. So do you think white is better in this position? Does white have an advantage? Maybe more active pieces, better pawn structure. Both are right. There is a better pawn structure for white because black's pawns are weak and the pieces are slightly more active. So Arjuna's got a slightly worse position against Pragnananda. Now after rook a1, a5, king to e1. Sorry, wait 1 second. Where were we? So bishop c5, king f1, rook a1 he played, not a5, rook c7, and now king f1 and knight d7, attacking the bishop. So takes, king takes. And what should white do now? How do we put pressure on this pawn? It's very important to like target a weakness and put more pressure on it. So if you want to put pressure on this, you need to build up more, right? So b4 is sensible to stop a5, but first he doubles the rook. So you want to put both rooks on the open file. So rook to a3. We are on move number 22. Now c5, c4, rook to b7. Weakness on b3 is exploited. Rook a1, a5. If you take the a pawn, the b pawn will fall. So a5, king to e1. Pragnananda activates his king, continues to activate. King d6 and knight to c1. Where is the knight going? Just like a waiting move. Rook a7, knight a2. Oh, so the knight is heading to the c3 square, to b5. So Pragnananda is heading there. So knight a2, after this, rook a7, knight a2, king c6, and knight c3. Knight b6, f4. First he stops e5, gains some space there. Knight c8 and knight b5, attacking the rook. Rook goes to a6 and now rook d1. Prag is trying to, like he has limited black's rooks here, now he's trying to get to that side. Rook to d1. Let's see how he reacted, Arjun reacted. Arjun just plays knight b6. Rook a2. This rook is also heading to the d file. So rook to a2, rook f8. Just waiting, letting the rook come in, but just waiting on rook f8. 1 second. I think I got myself confused there a little bit. So after knight b5, rook a6, rook d1, knight b6, rook a2, rook f8. Yeah, rook d6. The white rook jumps in to d6. King goes to b7, and now knight to c3. The rook comes back to a8. A rook comes to d2, and the rook comes to c8. Now the rook again comes back to a2. Rook a2 again waits, rook f8. Now rook d1, it's like it's coming back full circle. Rook d1, rook a7, rook da1, and rook f8. It's a funny thing. They just went back a few moves and got this position. But instead of a7, the rook would have been better on a6. Because now there is a winning move here for, after rook a7, after rook a8, there is a winning move here for Pragnananda. This move was a mistake, putting the rook on a8. Why is that? What can Pragnananda do after rook to a8? There is a way to get an advantage. Knight b5 and then knight d6 check, winning the pawn. So instead of rook a8, the only chance for Arjun to keep it slightly playable was to go a4. Give up the pawn. But it will lead to exchange. Knight takes, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes. It will be an exchange of lot of pieces, rook endgame with one pawn extra. That was the best chance to play on. But after this, knight b5, rook a6, knight d6, Arjun is now in a lost position. King c7, Knight takes pawn. Knight d7. Knight g5, attacking another pawn. Knight f6. Rook is defending it. Knight f3. Knight e4. And knight d2. Knight goes back to f6. And king f2. Knight g4 check. The king goes to g2. So Arjun tries to be active with e5. Now knight e4. Takes. Takes. The rook comes back to e8, attacking the knight. Knight into c5. So Arjun gives a one more pawn. The pawn on e2 is defended. So one more pawn gone, and black is going for some activity. So after knight to c5, now comes rook c6. Knight goes back to d3 and rook g6. Can you find out the next move for Pragnananda? How do you react to this pressure? If you are white, what will you do after rook g6? Pragnananda played a gangster move here. You've got an extra 2 pawns and a third pawn is there, but there is something going on the file. Some rook business is going on. So how do you react to that if you are white? Pragnananda plays h3, asking black to do your worst. There is nothing to attack with the knight. So Arjun just moves the knight to e3 and the king comes to f2. Rook comes to g2, but this is just temporary activity for black. King goes to f3, rook to h2. I would get scared here if I am white because black is becoming too active. The h pawn is, and yes, we are up by 2 pawns, but how to deal with this? So after rook to h2, just knight f2. Calm, knight f2. Defending the pawn. g5. Rook can do pawn. Wait, the pawn was on a5. Sorry, I must have made a mistake there. G into f4, sorry. G into f4. Rook a7 check. King d6. Knight e4 check. King e6. What do we do? Rook a6 check. King e5. Rook a5 check. The end is near. The king comes to d4 and Pragnananda finishes off the black king right in the center of the board with a checkmate. So once Pragnananda got that extra pawn, there was no turning back. He just played active moves and Arjun collapsed after a few moves. So this was a crucial game between the two Indian youngsters, and Prag is now leading the tournament along with 2 others with these kind of wins. So round 8 is currently going on. So those who are live here, please watch the games on chess.com or Leeches live with commentary. It's fun. It's the best classical tournament at the top level apart from the World Championship. So it was fun doing this live. So have a good night, guys. See you in the next live on Sunday.